Hello, I'm Hydronum, and today I'm going to be going over the extreme basics of EU4 combat. Combat is a central tenet of the EU4 game. It is what shapes different countries as well as what dictates how and where future expansion will occur. It is important to understand how it works, or else you might not understand why it is that you just lost. Now, how does one engage in combat? This is going to the very basics of combat. It's very simple. It occurs automatically when one army enters the exact same province as an army that is hostile to it. Then the battle will begin. On screen, I should have an image of a current combat. To see this, you just need to click on the armies while they are engaged in combat. Now, I'm going to quickly run through the different parts and then I'll be moving on to explaining each one in a little bit more depth soon. First, we have the attacking army and their general in red, and the defending army in general in green, as shown here. Secondly, we have the troop numbers of each army in the same colours. Third, we have the stat block of each of the armies. These are based off the stats of the general that is leading the army, not necessarily individual army or soldier regiments. Fourth, we have the current morale, compared to the maximum morale of all of the armies that are engaged in the combat. This is not an individual line, and when you enter combat, it may not be at full because the other army may have a higher morale than your current army does. Fifth, we have the units engaged in these boxes. I'll explain more soon. And finally, we have the combat roll for the phase and any modifiers affecting the combat. There are a few extra bits, such as the terrain, which is in the center, as you can see in this case it is in mountains, as well as in the top left corner there is a little white flag and a cross through it that shows that you cannot retreat during this time. There are a few other little bits, but they're not too important right now. Attackers versus defenders. Up until recently, combat was a lot more simple in who was the attacker and who was the defender. However, it is still exceedingly simple, so I'll quickly jump into it now. The attacker is usually the army that marches into the province and hits into another army that is hostile to it at the time. However, the latest changes have made it so that if you are relieving a fort, that is, if there is an enemy army on top of a fort, not necessarily sieging at the time, but passing over is also okay. If the army is on that province and you engage with them, the defender and attacker position is reversed. For instance, if you attack an army that is besieging a mountain fort, then you will be the defender of said attack because you are relieving a fort. It reverses the terrain penalty, making it a lot easier if you use forts strategically to be able to pick and choose where you are going to fight your battles. Troop numbers. Troops are broken into three classes: infantry, cavalry, and cannon. Infantry, standard troops, cheapest, and balanced in fire and shock. Early game they don't do too much damage, however they will make up the front line of your armies. Cavalry, shock troops, more expensive than infantry and almost completely useless in fire phases. Early in the shock phase, these troops deal large amounts of damage to both troop numbers and morale. Cannon, only available after Miltech 7. These troops are support troops above all else. They are extremely expensive. They are, however, the only troop that can attack from the back row, dealing 50% of their normal pip damage to the front row. Pips will be explained in another video. They also speed up sieging fortified provinces by giving a siege modifier to the siege rolls, potentially allowing the walls to fall faster. Stat blocks. These are three important stats shown here: discipline, morale, and tactics. Discipline. This is at the top. It is 100%, however, it can be modified by different ideas, advisors, and events. Discipline affects the damage dealt as well as the damage received equal to the value change from 100. For instance, if you have 105% discipline, you will deal 5% extra damage, as well as receive 5% less damage. Morale. The willingness to fight on. The higher this is, the longer the army will fight, irregardless of the casualties sustained. Maximum morale is also used as the calculation for morale damage dealt to other enemies, so having higher maximum morale will deal more damage to enemy unit morale than having low morale. During the early parts as well as the late parts of the game, morale tends to play the biggest role in whether or not an army successfully attacks. This is why countries such as France are seen as such powerhouses. Morale is also the important thing that helps keep your troops in the fight. If, before 12 days of entering a battle, you run out of morale, then it is very likely that your troops will in fact be completely destroyed instead of being able to retreat somewhere else. This is known as a stack wipe. Tactics. This is the tactical prowess of the army as well as its generals. This number is a modifier for the casualties received. It is also altered by discipline, so higher discipline will give you more tactics. It is also increased through Miltech. The morale bar. The morale bar represents the army's combined morale position compared to the highest morale army of all of the current engaged armies. If this reaches 0, the army will rout. If the units reach 0 within 12 days, it is possible for a unit to be stack wiped. It is also possible that this will show that you have morale, however, your troops may not be fighting. This may be because you have empty units, so this bar is not always accurate onto whether or not you're going to be able to continue the fight. Units in combat. The unit combat screen is how you can see how the combat is progressing. The unit types are cross for infantry, backslash for cavalry, and dot for cannons. Infantry often fills out the center, with cavalry filling the flanks. Cannon slides into the back row, and any leftover infantry will sit on the back row as well, waiting for space to fill in forward. This screen shows that combat is a regiment versus regiment fight. Units attack only the unit directly ahead of it, unless there is no unit directly in front of it, or that unit has 0 troops. Then, it will attack the unit on the far left of its flanking range, which is highlighted by boxes surrounding the units that can be attacked. There will also be an arrow pointing to the unit that it is currently engaged with. If the unit is unable to engage with an enemy, it will sit there doing nothing. It is also important to note that just by being engaged in a battle, even if they are not participating or attacking or even on the front lines in any way, a unit will lose morale every single day of 0.1 units. You can also see that there are light boxes that are not filled out by units. These boxes indicate where units could be filled if there was space. Modifiers. These are the alterations to the army's fighting ability based on general, skill, location, and luck. Much to the despair of many, battle outcomes may be influenced by the die rolls. Some luck might just win a battle that should be lost, or turn a win into a wipe, or even ruin any chance of holding out. The die is 100% random. There is no weighting and there is no lucky bonuses to the die itself. It is 100% random, even if it doesn't feel like it. It rolls a number from 0 to 9, and the higher, the better. This die is then modified by terrain, applying any applicable penalties to the attacker. If the attacking general has more or less maneuver, a river crossing penalty will be applied, if there is a river to cross, that is. High maneuver, compared to the enemy general, may mean that you can avoid the river crossing entirely. There are also 2 phases in combat. These are the fire and shock phases. This is important, as different units do different damage in different phases. Cavalry, as said before, excels in the shock phase. There is also a modifier applied based on the general's skill to these rolls. A modifier is given to the general with the advantage in the phase equal to the skill difference between the generals. For instance, a 5 fire general versus a 3 fire general in the fire phase would receive a +2 to their rolls. So this is the absolute basics. There's a hell of a lot more to cover, and I will be following up with even more videos on combat because it is a rather in-depth system. In order to win battles though, rule of thumb is to have more troops than the enemies, have good generals, fight in terrain that doesn't penalize you or causes a penalty to your enemy, stack your morale or discipline so that you're at least equal to, or preferably higher than your enemy. Remember that infantry are balanced and good in all phases. Cavalry should be used to shock troops, assuming you have a general with decent shock. Cannon are used from the back row and deal half their normal damage to the front row from the back row. If they are on the front row, however, they do more damage. RNG is also a very, very important part of the battles. You can lose a battle through RNG alone, but don't worry, you can always come back and kill them again next time. So thank you very much for coming. I hope to do more videos on this soon. If you enjoy the content, please feel free to subscribe. If you would like to ask any questions or to watch me play live, there should be a link to my Twitch page below. Thank you very much for coming. I'm Hydronum, and have a good one.